You ever notice that person in the room who barely says a word, but somehow seems to know everything that's going on? They're leaning back, watching, eyes moving, maybe nodding, maybe smiling at the right moments. And halfway through the conversation, you realize something slightly unsettling. They've been collecting information the entire time, and you've been handing it over freely. Maybe that person is you. Or maybe it's the one friend who listens so well you forget they haven't shared anything about themselves. We tend to treat quietness like a blank space, like silence means absence. But for some people, silence is not empty at all. It's crowded, busy, active. And today, we're going to unpack the psychology of people who observe more than they speak, why they do it, what's really happening internally, and why it's often misunderstood. Because here's the secret. Not all quiet people are the same, and some of the most mentally active people in the room are saying the least. Let's start with the first type. There's the person who enters a conversation like they're stepping into a river. They don't jump in. They test the temperature. They listen to the tone, the rhythm, the power dynamics. Who's leading? Who's seeking approval? Who's uncomfortable? You might think they're shy or disengaged, but internally, their mind is running pattern recognition at full speed. This type learned early that information is safer than expression. Speaking too soon feels risky, like revealing your hand before you know the game. So they watch. They track inconsistencies. They notice micro-reactions, a raised eyebrow, a pause before a laugh, a sentence that doesn't quite match the body language. Psychologically, this comes from heightened social sensitivity, often tied to people who grew up needing to read the room accurately, maybe emotionally unpredictable households, maybe environments where saying the wrong thing had consequences. Silence became strategy. If this is you, you might notice that you feel more yourself after observing for a while, like you need context before authenticity. And when you do speak, it's usually precise, measured, sometimes uncomfortably accurate. Then there's another profile. This person isn't quiet because they're cautious, they're quiet because they're internal. Picture them at a cafe, listening to a friend talk about a bad week. They're nodding, but inside, they're mapping the emotional logic of the story. Not judging, not planning a response, just absorbing, translating the experience into something meaningful. These observers are deeply reflective. They don't feel the need to fill space because silence doesn't make them anxious. In fact, silence feels productive, like something is happening underneath. Their psychology is rooted in inward attention. Their primary experience of life happens internally, thoughts, associations, emotional layering. Talking interrupts that flow. Expressing something feels like exporting something delicate and unfinished. If you've ever thought, I'll talk once I understand what I think, this might be you. You may also notice that when you do speak, people sometimes say things like, wow, I never thought of it that way. Not because you're trying to be insightful, but because you waited until the thought was fully formed. But here's where it gets interesting. There's a third type of observer who stays quiet not because they're reflective or cautious, but because they've been misunderstood before. They've learned that speaking doesn't always equal being heard, that explaining yourself can lead to being reduced, labeled, or dismissed. So they pull back. They listen instead. They become fluent in other people's worlds while keeping their own private. This type often has a quiet, rebellious streak. Silence becomes autonomy, a way to say, I don't owe you my inner life. Psychologically, this can stem from identity fatigue. Maybe they've been over-explained, over-interpreted, or projected onto. Observation becomes a form of self-protection, control over narrative. If this resonates, you might feel strangely powerful in social settings. You know more about others than they know about you, and sometimes that imbalance feels safer. But it can also feel lonely, because being unseen by choice still has a cost. Then there's a fourth profile, one people rarely talk about. This observer isn't quiet because they want to be. They're quiet because they're overstimulated. They walk into a room and their brain lights up. Sounds overlap. Movements compete. Emotional cues stack on top of each other. Their mind goes into high input mode, like too many browser tabs open at once. Speaking requires energy they don't have, so they default to observing. Psychologically, this is common in highly sensitive or deeply perceptive people. Not fragile, not weak, just processing more data per second. For them, silence is regulation. It's how they stay balanced.
If you're this type, you might feel drained after socializing even when nothing bad happened. You might replay conversations afterward, noticing details others missed entirely. And you may need solitude not because you dislike people, but because your mind needs recovery time. Now here's the twist. People who observe more than they speak are often misread as passive, but psychologically, observation is an active stance. It's engagement without performance. And in a world that rewards visibility, speed, and loud certainty, this can feel like quiet resistance. Observers tend to value accuracy over immediacy, depth over dominance, understanding over being understood, at least at first. But there's a hidden risk here. When you spend too much time watching, you can start to feel like life is something happening in front of you instead of through you. Expression matters too. Being seen matters too. The healthiest observers learn when to step forward, when to translate their inner clarity into words, when silence serves them and when it costs them connection. So if you're someone who watches more than you speak, here's a question worth sitting with. Are you observing because it nourishes you or because it protects you? Because those two things feel similar, but they lead to very different lives. And if you're someone who knows a quiet observer, maybe there's another question. What might they see that you don't? Which of these profiles felt familiar? Maybe more than one. Maybe it changes depending on the room. If this landed somewhere personal, you're not alone. And if you want to keep exploring the quieter sides of human behavior, the thoughts people don't say out loud, you know where to find us. So tell me, quietly or out loud, are you the watcher or the one being watched?